Tonight on Bridge City News, D-Day events marking the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Normandy were held around the world today, including here in Lethbridge. It was day 4 of the Stephens trial in our city. We have the latest. And Farming Smarter hosted their first plot hop of the season. We will explain its importance to the farming community.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. On this day, 75 years ago, was one of the most significant battles in Canadian history, D-Day and the Battle of Normandy. According to federal government records, 1,074 Canadians lost their lives in that battle. Ainsley O'Reilly was at a special ceremony in Lethbridge earlier today, remembering those who fought valiantly so many years ago.
The Lethbridge Cenotaph filled with reverence this morning to commemorate the 75th anniversary of one of the most impactful battles in Canadian history. The Lethbridge Legion felt it was critical to host a local celebration.
It means a lot. These are the last remaining veterans of the Second World War. We have a few left from that and the Korean War, but obviously this will probably be the last major anniversary that these veterans can get out.
A gathering was held at the Legion afterwards with 98-year-old veteran Peter Pouquet in attendance. Peter has been decorated by the French military and lived through D-Day, keeping cover under barrage balloons.
Some areas of the service, it seems like it was yesterday, but some, actually, you don't want to remember them.
Walter Huff, another World War II veteran, wasn't on Juno Beach that day, but the battle affected him drastically.
But after I got home, I realized that 3 or 4 of my school buddies had given up their lives in the Normandy invasion. So thank you. That's my story. Yep.
Both veterans stress the importance of education.
I've talked to some school children and they haven't heard of D-Day. So it means that the school system is not doing enough for remembering. And I think it's very vital.
LCI student Tyler Black went to Juno Beach last year and spoke at today's ceremonies. He says today is one that will impact him forever.
Through these experiences, I've had this amazing opportunity to remember these soldiers and the sacrifice that they made. And it's something truly incredible, something I think will impact me for the rest of my life. And I hope that as I go forward, that I can continue to remember them.
The grade 12 student has a point. Truly incredible. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Close to 5,000 Canadians also gathered in France today commemorating the 75th anniversary of D-Day, including our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
14,000 Canadians stormed Juno Beach that day with no guarantee of victory. It was a gamble like the world had never seen before. But when duty called, Canadians from coast to coast to coast answered. The 3rd Division and the 2nd Armoured Brigade represented all of Canada. On the battlefields of Normandy, Francophones, Anglophones, Indigenous peoples, new Canadians came together as one fighting force, standing on guard for their British, American, and French allies.
U.S. President Donald Trump also spoke during the D-Day memorial. He thanked veterans, told stories of the battle, and saluted individual veterans who returned for the event.
10,000 men shed their blood, and thousands sacrificed their lives for their brothers, for their countries, and for the survival of liberty. Here with you are over 60 veterans who landed on D-Day. Our debt to you is everlasting. The battle began in the skies above us. In those first tense midnight hours, 1,000 aircraft roared overhead with 17,000 Allied airborne troops preparing to leap into the darkness beyond these trees. Then came dawn. The enemy who had occupied these heights saw the largest naval armada in the history of the world.
Global Affairs says it is aware of 2 Canadians who were abducted in Ghana. Local police say the 2 were attending Kusumi Technical University as part of an exchange program. Global Affairs is providing assistance to the victims' families, but is offering no other information in order to safeguard efforts to win the victims' release. It was day 4 of the Stephan retrial. David and Colette Stephan were convicted in 2016 for failing to provide the necessaries of life for their 18-month-old son Ezekiel, who died of bacterial meningitis. The couple was granted a retrial by the Supreme Court of Canada. Dr. Lloyd Clark took the stand today. He was one of the first attending physicians in the Cardston Hospital. David Stephan says today's testimony did not line up with the doctor's original testimony from 2016.
Some of the stuff that he testified to today that would establish his credibility and his experience was in large variance to what had been said back in the 2016 trial. So fortunately, we had the benefit of reviewing trial transcripts from 2016 previous to him getting on stand today. So as soon as there was issues at hand that he was bringing up that just didn't line up with what he had said in 2016, we were able to easily identify those issues and bring them forward, and he had to retract a number of the statements that he had made that were being used to basically bolster his experience and his expertise.
Dr. Clark came under fire last year for telling a group of Indigenous people who were standing outside of a convenience store in Cardston to get a job. He also asked them if they wanted a prescription for Tylenol 3, which is a highly addictive painkiller. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman is back in town after a recent trip to Quebec City, where he attended the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. He said the trip made him hopeful that some federal funding will come to the city to help upgrade the Lethbridge Airport.
Certainly, that's going to improve the traveler experience and support the efforts that we've made to bring improvements to the airport. We think it's time that the airport had some substantial improvements. Customer comfort is really important. When people are flying out of the airport, the waiting times are getting longer. Access to services such as washrooms and food are important, but also people expect more things from an airport these days. They expect improved Wi-Fi, they expect better seating, they expect desk areas. There's a lot of things that people are looking for airport travel because they have to spend longer times in airport.
The estimated cost to upgrade YQL is $35 million. The city officially takes over the airport on July the 1st. The rural areas of southern Alberta desperately need air ambulance service. That was the message today from the Southern Alberta Council of Public Affairs, who welcomed Halo Rescue, the life-saving helicopter service that transports people to the hospital.
Quite often we are called out, especially to rural Alberta, because we have no role to play inside the city of Lethbridge, for example, but we do at Raymond or we do at Tabor, so we can get a person to the doctor in a timely fashion, and they talk about the golden hour. Yeah, there's a reason why the golden hour works.
Halo is funded entirely by public donations and corporate partners. A Lethbridge restaurant had to close its doors because of a cockroach infestation. The New Dynasty restaurant was ordered shut down by Alberta Health Services on Tuesday. The report from the HS says roaches were found on walls, floors, and shelves. Dead roaches were found in glue traps, as were egg casings. The owner of the New Dynasty restaurant is now required to eliminate the infestation before the restaurant can reopen. The HS report also found many high-risk food items, including chicken thawing in a sink and more than 20 packages of ribs left at room temperature to thaw. Farming Smarter had its first Lethbridge plot hop of the year. As Loris Alexander explains, the event covers a wide range of topics, including weed ID, pesticide application safety, and crop sequencing.
I'm presenting at Farming Smarter this year, partly because we have been doing research on flea beetles. Agriculture Canada and Farming Smarter have an excellent history of collaborations.
The focus of Farming Smarter is to inform producers about the applied research being conducted in the region and to help them make informed choices.
Well, we have a number of speakers that are with Ag Canada. We have a guest speaker all the way from Manitoba, from the University of Manitoba. And Dr. Bill Hammond has his own ag research company. I think together we are bringing very important information to producers. We do a lot of research on, in our laboratories or in greenhouses, but it's really important to bring these trials to the field and see how these research questions and these recommendations that we may have for growers, how we can test them at the level of plots. And eventually we should be able to take these same studies and apply them at farmers' fields, and that is the next step.
The ultimate goal of Plot Hop is to sustain land, water, soil, and farms for the benefit of everyone.
Where we hope to apply this test and validate what we learned on farmers' fields.
The full-day event ran from 8 a.m. this morning until 3:30 p.m. at the Lethbridge Research Center plots. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Water. It is essential to living and our way of life here in southern Alberta. But where does our water come from? The Galt Museum and Archives answered that question with the official opening of their outdoor irrigation exhibit today.
What we got happening today is our official opening of our outdoor irrigation exhibit that we have here at the Galt. It's a very generous, we had a very generous donation from Richardson Oilseeds and the Friends of the Galt to be able to put this on and to showcase what irrigation is like in southwestern Alberta. We're using this as an educational tool for children, adults, anybody who comes here to the museum, just to see what's relevant about irrigation here in southwestern Alberta, to be able to teach that to those who might not know what it's about. This exhibit is open to the public. It'll be here. It's a permanent exhibit for us, but it's only operational from May to about the first part of October, just because of water, and we don't want to use it during the winter months.
The irrigation exhibit was designed by Brad Brown, the Galt's exhibit designer, in partnership with Richardson Oilseed. It was manufactured by Mosaic Industries. Big Brothers and Sisters of Lethbridge will be receiving a solid financial boost. The group was selected to receive $50,000 from the Home Depot to help with the renovation of their building. It is part of the Home Depot Canada Foundation grant. Twice a year, Home Depot runs the Orange Door Project, where charitable groups who are dedicated to ending youth homelessness are financially supported. Both Woods Homes and the YWCA have received funding in the past. The United Conservatives have introduced legislation to overhaul Alberta's School Act. The opposition NDP is not impressed, and they say it is just a cover to out gay kids. NDP leader Rachel Notley says the bill does not include existing legal protections passed by the former government for gay-straight alliances known as GSAs. Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says the bill has the strongest GSA protections in Canada and that the province is committed to an inclusive, non-bullying environment in all schools. Plans are being made to make it easier for oil and gas rigs to be transported within job sites between Alberta and Saskatchewan. Premiers Jason Kenney and Scott Moe have signed a memorandum of understanding pledging to harmonize regulations governing the movement of rigs. The deal was signed at an oil and trade show in Saskatchewan. Both continued their attack on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the federal carbon tax. As for the stalled Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, both Kenney and Moe believe it will be approved by the June 18th deadline. Conservative MPs pressed the Liberals yesterday about what the government is doing to end a deepening diplomatic dispute with China, including the timeline to name a new ambassador to the Asian nation.
Now, 5 months ago, former Liberal Cabinet Minister John McCallum had to resign in shame as our ambassador to China. We're now in June and the Prime Minister has not appointed a replacement.
That's right.
Canadians are being detained on bogus charges, soybean producers are facing new barriers, and canola producers are having shipments blocked. And now the Chinese government is going after our meat producers. This is going from bad to worse. Why has the Prime Minister not appointed an ambassador to China?
We are very concerned with the detention of Canadians in China, and that's why we're rallying an important amount of friendly countries, and also that we were able to make sure that we have a joint statement with the United States calling for the immediate release and, of course, rejecting the wrongful detentions of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. Thank you.
A cross-party group of MPs, flanked by groups to help veterans in need, made a plea in Ottawa to help end veteran homelessness by the year 2025.
I firmly believe this is an issue which must be addressed by the Government of Canada.
Throughout the committee's review of this issue, I've been constantly impressed by the resolve of all of my honourable colleagues to work together to understand and solve this issue. In studying the statistics, personal experiences, or recommendations brought to us by committee witnesses, one thing became very clear. A veteran's experience of homelessness or lack of stable housing is something that we can and must fix together. With all the key information at our disposal, we must get past triage and head towards a long-term treatment of this issue.
Veterans' homelessness is totally within federal jurisdiction to solve. We have all the tools and all the resources we need. There really is no excuse in a country as rich as ours that any veteran is homeless and living on the streets.
A man who killed a CFL player in a dispute outside of a Calgary bar has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 18 years. Nelson Lugella was convicted earlier this year of second-degree murder and the death of former Stampeder Mylan Hicks. The trial heard that Hicks, who had been celebrating a victory with his teammates, was shot twice after a disagreement over a spilled drink in 2016. Hicks' mother, Renee Hill, says she's relieved by the sentence and can move on now that Lugella's fate has been decided. Many areas of Canada are seeing a huge influx of new immigrants, especially from war-torn countries like Syria. I asked Pastor Scott Dixon of the University Alliance Church in Lethbridge how he reaches out to those from different cultures.
1 in 5 Canadians are really new Canadians now, and they're just coming from every parts of the world. And like in my own church, we have people from all over the world, and we welcome them. We have Muslim people coming to our church, and we just share Jesus' love, not just verbally, but we really have to live it out.
Watch the full interview with Pastor Scott as he discusses how leaders in the Christian community are making church more relevant and exciting. That's coming up after business news. Lots of clouds, but mild today, and some rain is in the forecast. All of the weather details are coming up. We had light showers in parts of southwestern Alberta today. Tonight, a chance of more rain developing with a low near 9 degrees. Tomorrow, the clouds should break and we should see a high near 16. A nice weekend is shaping up. Partly cloudy on Saturday with a high again near 16 degrees. Just a few clouds and 17 for Sunday. Monday, mainly sunny with a high expected near 22. Pretty much the same picture on Tuesday. Wednesday, the mercury will climb even higher with a high near 25. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 21 and an average low of 8. The highest temperature in this state was recorded in 1972 at 32 degrees, and the record low was 0 in 1951. Sunrise was at 5:26, sunset at 9:34. Let's peek into the national forecast for tomorrow now. Victoria will have light showers and a high of 17. Light rain at 16 is on tap for Vancouver. Expect rain and a high of only 7 tomorrow in Calgary. Rain and 8 degrees for Edmonton on Friday. Just a few clouds and a beautiful 25 is expected in Regina tomorrow. Expect light showers and 21 in Saskatoon. Mainly sunny and a hot 32 for Winnipeg. Toronto will be mainly sunny and a high of 23. Partly cloudy and 24 for Ottawa. Montreal will be mainly sunny and 24 as well. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have a few clouds and 22. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have light showers and 20. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly sunny and 18. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain and a high near 13 degrees tomorrow. The Quebec-based engineering firm that has been at the center of political battles in Ottawa is in the running for a major project in Edmonton. SNC-Lavalin is a finalist for the city's most recent light rail transit project. They're bidding for the West Valley Line LRT. The federal government may still issue a deferred prosecution agreement, or SNC-Lavalin could be found guilty, which would mean it would not be allowed to win any Canadian-based contracts for 10 years. The other two finalists for the project are Flatiron and Urban Mobility Partners. Our province's Economic Development Minister, Tanya Furr, is heading to Japan and South Korea to promote our agricultural industries. Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, says a trip to Japan may be just what is needed considering the trade issues we're currently having with China.
I think a lot of people maybe don't realize just how big of a trade partner of Canada's Japan is. They're our third largest agricultural market. They're an enormous beef market for us, about $230 million in 2018. So this is actually a pretty important trip, I think.
Catch the entire interview with our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson talking trade and how the government is attracting more business to Alberta. That's coming up in the second half of our show. The economy showed signs of strength in April as Canada posted its smallest merchandise trade deficit since last October. Stats Canada said the deficit narrowed to $966 million from a revised $2.3 billion in March. Economists had expected a deficit of $2.8 billion for April. StatsCan says exports rose 1.3% to $50.7 billion, while imports fell 1.4% to $51.7 billion. Tim Hortons is expanding into Thailand. The coffee and donut chain says it signed a franchise and development agreement with We Eat Company, owned by one of the richest families in Thailand. A spokesperson for Tim said the Southeast Asian country has a thriving coffee market. The parent company, Restaurant Brands International, recently announced a major global expansion for its 3 major brands, which also include Burger King and Popeye's Louisiana Kitchen. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, it was on this date in 1944 that Canadians, along with the British and Americans, stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, in what is referred to as D-Day, or the beginning of the end of the Second World War. Veterans and local dignitaries paid their respects during a special ceremony held earlier today at the Lethbridge Cenotaph. With Canada's trade issues with China, the Alberta government is looking at other markets in Asia for our beef, including Japan and South Korea. Legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Lethbridge Women's Connection presents Let Us Entertain You, Thursday, June 13th in the lower level of the Keg. This inspiring evening will feature a delicious dinner, live musical entertainment by the Seiza Quartet and Southern Accord Chorus. Plus, freelance writer and ovarian cancer survivor Kathy Mogus will share a powerful message called From Failure to Freedom. Cost is $22. For reservations, call B at 403-328-1708 or call Linda at 403-381-2574. Rehoboth Christian Ministries will host their annual pork roast Friday, June 14th at the Rehoboth Garden Center in Coaldale. This is a come-and-go supper, which will be served from 5 to 7 p.m. Supper includes roast pork, roast beef, potatoes, salads, and dessert. Cost is by donation. For more details, call 403-345-5199. The IG Wealth Management Walk for Alzheimer's is taking place Saturday, June 15th at Nicholas Sharon Park in West Lethbridge. Registration opens at 10 a.m., followed by opening ceremonies at 11. After the walk, enjoy a barbecue lunch. For more information, visit walkforalzheimers.ca or call the Alzheimer's Society at 403-329-3766. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Alberta's Economic Development Minister Tanya Furr is headed to Asia to promote the agricultural and forestry industries. To chat more about it, along with some big stories from the legislature this week, is Tyler Dawson, Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Welcome back to BCN, Tyler.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, Tyler, considering what's been happening with China, a trip to Japan and South Korea may be just what the trade doctor ordered for Alberta.
Yeah, so we've got some Alberta ministers going along, some provincial ministers going along from elsewhere, and the federal minister Jim Carr is going as well. So it's a big set of people who are headed out there, and I think a lot of people maybe don't realize just how big of a trade partner of Canada's Japan is. They're our third largest agricultural market. They're an enormous beef market for us, about $230 million in 2018. So this is actually a pretty important trip, I think. Now, and there's a few reasons why I think that's the case beyond just sort of the numbers. many viewers in Lethbridge, I imagine, will recall the BSE scare, the mad cow disease scare back in the early 2000s. And Japan just sort of finally put an end to some smaller restrictions on that just in recent months. So, not only is there this promotional aspect, but there's probably also, a nice thank you to be said to the Japanese for dropping those restrictions. And they're also going to South Korea, which does as well still have some restrictions on Canadian beef. So I think hopefully we might see a little bit of movement on that. Who knows if it'll get there, but certainly that's part of this as well. Now, people also remember last summer there was this mysterious canola thing where there was a ban in China, and then there was also this really serious wheat thing where there were genetically modified wheat stalks sort of found on this access road somewhere in southern Alberta that caused this really big sort of agricultural kerfuffle with bans on imports to China and South Korea as well, I believe. Now that's mostly all been resolved, but I think there's probably a little bit of smoothing over still to be done and updating our counterparts over there on these developments. So hopefully we will have, a drama-free growing season and harvest this year compared to last year, because when I did a little bit of reporting on it last summer, I mean, people were pretty tense about that. Those are big markets over there for our products. And if the Kenney government can come back with some big news, some little news on any of it, I think that's a pretty good start to their tenure. And as we've talked about before, rural Albertans, farmers, ranchers, big UCP base. So, it's good to see, I think, that one of their very first sort of foreign trips as a government is going to be to try and work on some of those issues to expand market access, those kinds of things in those really big trade partners for us.
Tyler, the Alberta carbon tax was repealed and received royal assent, but gas here in Lethbridge is still $1.20 a litre. What is it in Edmonton right now?
Well, I took a look at Gas Buddy a little bit earlier, and it is apparently at its lowest about 94 cents a litre in Edmonton right now. I was out and about the other day, and it had sort of come down below $1.10 to $1.07, $1.04, depending where you were. So I suspect it's cheaper out in the suburbs a little bit, and where I am downtown, I think, is a little bit higher. But prices have gone down, that's for sure. And they should have, in theory, come down about 6 cents because of the repeal. That's more or less 6.5 cents, give or take, I believe, is what that sort of tacked on per liter. So people should see some relief, but maybe as consolation, it could be $1.27.
Now, the federal carbon tax may be kicking in soon. Premier Kenney says he's going to challenge that in court. Explain to our viewers how that would work. Will we actually see a federal carbon tax, or does Ottawa have to wait until the outcome of the courts?
Well, it's a good question. And the direct answer to that is probably that I don't know if we quite know yet. So the federal government has not given a date by which it's going to impose its carbon tax. I think there is a good bet, almost a certain bet that they're going to impose some sort of carbon tax on things like gasoline. What happens with industrial emitters and things like that is a little bit up in the air because the Kenney government has promised a carbon tax for sort of higher level industrial emitters. So what that federal structure is going to look like in Alberta, we don't know. McKenna's office, Federal Environment Minister Catherine McKenna, her office hasn't confirmed when this is going to happen, only sort of that they're working on it. This is in place in several other provinces who did not develop their own carbon taxation or cap and trade, carbon pricing, whatever you want to call it, schemes. So it will likely come into effect. Now, as for the court challenge, what the government is likely to do is what's called a reference case. So the Alberta government will ask Alberta's highest court, which is the Alberta Court of Appeal. They will say, can you take a look at this situation and tell us whether or not it's constitutional? So it sort of sidesteps a little bit having the actual legal battle in some ways. So that's what's happening in Ontario, and that's what happened in Saskatchewan. Now, the Saskatchewan government lost its appeals case recently, and it has decided it's going to appeal that reference case to the Supreme Court of Canada. So the other thing, of course, is that Ontario's case is still ongoing. A ruling has not come out on that just yet. So what the Kenney government is basically waiting for is a sense of which way the winds are blowing on this. If Saskatchewan is lost, if Ontario loses, then they need to take a look at this and go, oh goodness, we need to come up with a really novel constitutional argument here, because the two that were out there and that the UCP, when they weren't in government, sort of backed as third parties in these court cases, if those don't work, the UCP needs to do some pretty quick thinking. Now, if the Ontario case does work, then they can sort of hew a little bit closer to that line, I think. So government lawyers, I imagine, are sort of scrambling as best they can to keep an eye on those two cases and sort of tinker around where they can with constitutional law here to figure out what to do. The Saskatchewan case in particular, I spoke to a law professor some months ago who said, this is not a non-compelling argument, but it is sort of tinkering around the margins of Canadian constitutional law. And the UCP government is not in a super great position on that in some ways. It is a tricky constitutional question. Saskatchewan has lost, but so, I mean, if no federal carbon tax comes in, they don't have to worry about it. It is very likely that will happen, and they're going to have to do some quick thinking on the law.
Tyler, our real answer to prayer is that High Level has finally been receiving some rain lately. About 4,000 residents have been allowed to return to their homes. Premier Kenney has promised to help rebuild in Paddle Prairie. The wildfire outside of High Level, however, is still burning out of control and moving northward.
Yeah, so about half the population, as you said, has gone back. There are still lots of mandatory evacuations up there. The folks who have returned to High Level, they're still on an evacuation alert. Slave Lake, I believe, is still on an 8-hour evacuation alert. So, people still have to be ready to move sort of quite quickly. And it seems like it's a waiting game at this point. The firefighters are doing their best. The rain certainly helped. I just saw actually in the American press that firefighters from Montana are coming up to help. So, everything is, it's going as best it could in a lot of ways. A handful of building structures were lost in Paddle Prairie. I don't believe we know whether or not they were homes yet. And as you said, Kenney has promised to sort of help rebuild. And I'm sure all Albertans are going to come together to help those people. It's a small settlement of only a few hundred people. It's not, Fort McMurray with tens of thousands, but I have no doubt that Albertans are going to have their back when they get home and when they begin that process of rebuilding.
And hopefully more Northern Albertans will receive some financial compensation as well, those who had to evacuate. Premier Kenney announced that there's also a moratorium on supervised injection sites. So Medicine Hat will not be getting one, Red Deer, Calgary won't be getting a second one. Tyler, what will replace them, if anything?
Yeah, so the government has basically promised to do an evaluation of safe injection sites with sort of social impact studies, listen to what the community has to say, and really also, it seems, try and sort of drill down into whether or not they're working. And what that will look like, it's I think quite hard to say. So if you're looking at social impacts, certainly that might be in terms of if you've increased crime around a supervised injection site. That might be whether or not you have difficulties with businesses who are unhappy and things like that. So they're going to be evaluating all of those things and deciding whether or not they're going to continue. They're planning on continuing to fund the ones that do currently exist. And so whether or not they will fund the new ones down the road is sort of dependent on the outcome of those reviews. Now, there are perhaps some innovative ways that municipalities could overcome this if they so desired. So something similar happened in Ontario after Doug Ford won, and funding was suspended for injection sites in Ottawa. And the city of Ottawa said, well, these have federal government approval, the exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, so we will step in and provide this funding for it. So I think if you have a municipality that is keen on this sort of thing, you may be able to find a way to actually open it and keep funding it. But at this point, what that's going to mean is a review to decide whether or not the government wants to go forward with these.
A bill to allow municipal councils to cut business taxes was introduced recently. Now, will this help bring more business to some of the abandoned and vacant areas of various Alberta cities?
That is certainly the theory. So the idea is that if you are a business looking to start up, you can now look at Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, wherever, and discuss with council. And council could say, look, if you bring your business here, you will not have to pay your municipal tax for 15 years. So you have 15 sort of tax-free-ish years. The bill will come due eventually, but perhaps by then you will be, well seated and turning a profit, and you can pay those taxes then. So, it's part of this larger plan to make Alberta a little bit lower tax, more business friendly. We're seeing that with the cut of the corporate tax from 12% down to 8% over the next few years here. And I think it's helpful to look back at the bids for the new Amazon headquarters. That was, everyone was in a frenzy about that about a year ago, and municipalities were pitching Amazon and saying, "Come to Ottawa, come to Calgary, wherever. We'd love to have you." And they were competing against American cities that had all these powers to offer tax relief, offer subsidies, and all these sorts of things. Now, one can quibble over whether or not you should be sort of sucking up to big business in some ways to bring them to your city, certainly. But if a city wants to make this decision, if they want to compete with other cities that are able to offer these incentives, shall we say, what this does is it gives them a tool to attract those businesses and start taxing them down the road. So will it work? I mean, certainly one hopes. I think the other thing that cities are going to have to consider here is whether or not they can afford to go without some of these taxes for a period of time. As we're seeing in Calgary, this sort of bizarre financial crunch that council's finding itself in, and governments end up being a little bit stretched when there's a downturn because less taxation is coming in sort of generally. So will anyone do it? I think that that remains to be seen. Will it work? That remains to be seen. But on the face of it, it operates on the same principle as the corporate tax cut. If you lower the difficulty, the threshold for doing business, in theory, business is going to come.
Tyler, the Enbridge Line 3 was held up in court. Who knows if it'll actually even happen now. As for shipping crude by rail, the NDP is still pretty angry that the deal was cancelled and that it may be shifted to private producers. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this was a policy that the Notley government sort of brought in the dying days of its government. Viewers will remember this big crisis last November, December, when oil was way down and was selling at this huge price differential in the United States. And sort of the reason for that is you had this really big backlog in storage in Alberta. And you didn't have a good way to get it out of the country. And so the solution that the Notley government came up with was, well, we will spend billions of dollars on contracts for locomotives and for cars to ship all this oil. And the Kenney government has not been particularly enthusiastic about that and has promised to cancel it. So the NDP is saying that, this is landlocking Alberta's oil again. This is keeping it in the province. There's no way to get it out. And the UCP are saying, well, this is a perfectly legitimate way of doing things. We'll have private rail do it. We'll find other ways to ship it. We can't have grain displaced on rail lines. That's always a big sort of point of contention. So I believe it has been canceled. The NDP is mad about it. What the alternative solution looks like in the end sort of remains to be seen and how well it does work. Now, oil prices have come back up thanks to the other thing that the NDP did, which was curtailment on production. So things have certainly calmed down a little bit. And the other thing that is often forgotten in this debate, I should say, is that these rail cars were not going to be coming online until initially it was late 2019, and then it was sort of moved up to midsummer. But as you mentioned with Enbridge Line 3, that was supposed to be up and running in the next few months here, and that's held up in court. And as you said, who knows? Those court decisions can go either way. They can hold you up for a long time. So, but Kenney's people seem confident that they can get a rail deal done here that's going to make this happen. But it comes back at the end of the day to what everyone has really been saying, is that the only way to really get ourselves out of this crunch is get the Trans-Canada expansion done. And who knows? They keep saying we're closer and closer to shovels in the ground, but it's really hard to say.
I could just picture right now at the legislature more desk thumping from the NDP. But hey, let's talk about that desk thumping. The ban is now in place at the Ledge, and the NDP are just what? They're clapping now?
Believe it or not, yeah. So as you said, you're not allowed to pound on your desk, rah, rah, rah anymore. And the NDP just, they can still clap. So that's what they're doing. So, I mean, if the issue was the noise, there's still noise at the legislature. If there was something particularly offensive about table pounding, that's no longer a thing. But MPs, or MLAs, I should say, are free to clap as they will to spur on their leaders. So maybe that's not what the UCP foresaw, but
you know what? I've got an easy solution for this: 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down. That's nice and quiet. Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me once again from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me on.
According to Stats Canada, about 2/3 of Canadians say they are Christians. However, it's only a relatively small percentage who actually attend church regularly. Now, why is that? And what are they missing out on? Our guest today is Pastor Scott Dixon, lead pastor of University Drive Alliance Church in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much for the work you're doing here in our community and our province.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure having you on the show. Okay, Pastor Scott, let's get to it. Bottom line, why is it that not a lot of people are attending church as much as they used to?
Well, I think there's probably a number of reasons. Perhaps they've been hurt by someone. Perhaps sometimes they see people that appear at least appear hypocritical. They're living one life and saying something else. Perhaps they just felt like they've been kind of used by the church. They're serving, they're giving, and
they've been burned, right?
They've been burned, and so. And sometimes, quite honestly, they just don't want to submit to the leadership God's put in place, or maybe they just don't want to forgive. And then I think sometimes God just becomes one of the good choices out there. And so they're not so much opposed, it's just something that he kind of fades into the background a little bit. Yeah.
So what do you say to people then, Pastor, that say, you know what, I don't go to church because I find it boring. It's the worship is great, and then I got to sit down there listening to this guy for an hour, preach from the pulpit, and it gets to be a little boring. The same business model year after year after year. Yeah. Maybe mix it up a little bit, maybe put in a skit in there, or maybe use some video, or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely the case, because sometimes guys like me are really boring, and that's such a shame, because the Bible is not a boring book, right?
No, that's right.
It's very much written in an intimate way, in a personal way, and so if guys like me are not handling it well, that's not good. And so I'd probably say to them, I'm sure at times you're really right, and we need to be more creative and to take the Word of God and let people tell their story. And so, video and in the digital world, just to communicate God's message to them in a way that touches their heart.
And people's attention spans are so short nowadays, right?
Absolutely, yeah, very short. And they're used to being able to get whatever they want, anywhere they want it, anytime they want it. And so, with their cell phones. So, yeah, we need to be very aware of that in the church, yeah.
How about people that say to you, you know what, Pastor, I can feel the presence of God when I go out on a hike at Waterton Lakes National Park. I can worship God there. Or I can worship God by watching a wonderful series on television. Yeah. By watching some of the televangelists who are out there, and we have a lot of good ones. So what do you say to them?
Absolutely. I would say I can do that too. And I do, I would hope, in all those kind of arenas, because they're good arenas. But when you look at Scripture, it's just clear that God has said that the local church is his plan A. It's one of the meta-narratives, I would call it. The overarching stories all through the Old, all through the New Testament. Most of the New Testament is written to local churches. And so Jesus said, I'm going to build my church. Nothing's going to prevail against it. And Jesus went to church every week, we see in Luke 4. Paul did every week. David said, I rejoiced with those when we said, let's go to the house of the Lord. So they went and they served in a pretty hostile environment sometimes, right? Yeah.
And no man or woman is an island. You need that fellowship to grow, do you not?
Absolutely.
With other believers?
Absolutely. Like we need each other. We want to be able to pray for one another, to care for one another, to support one another, and also just to help each other be accountable. Like I need that. I need people going, Scott, I'm wondering about one or two of those choices you've made, or, is everything okay? And if we kind of isolate ourselves, we kind of step away from those things, which I don't think is healthy. Yeah.
What do you think about, this might seem like kind of a controversial topic, but Christians who go out and have a smoke? We all have our vices in life, right?
Yeah.
But this is God's holy temple.
Yeah, and that's really, there's nothing directly about that in Scripture, but I would probably just say to them, as I would with a lot of things like that, what's God speaking into your life about that? Have you asked him seriously? Mm-hmm. And then just respond with that. And so I've had people say, I'd love to quit, would you pray for me? And I have. And we all have things that we deal with in life. I certainly do. That's not one of them, but there's probably some other things, you know. So absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk more about accountability, Pastor, and even correction in our daily spiritual walk.
Yeah.
It's important to maybe have a mentor in the church
Mm-hmm.
that can help you along.
Absolutely, and we all, I think we need that. I certainly have people like that in my life that will ask me the tough questions. I have a couple of dear friends that they'll ask me those questions, and then they'll even say sometimes, "Are you lying, Scott?" Just because they love me enough to want to see me in a healthy relationship with God and with my wife and with the people that really matter in my life. Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of pastors nowadays are no longer using the hell, fire, and brimstone type of preaching that maybe you and I grew up with when we were younger.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? It's more about love, love, love. I mean, God is love, but we know there's another side to God too.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right?
no, yeah, I think you have to preach on that subject as well. But I think, to be honest, some guys that sit in my chair, we're tempted to water the message down because we see some people migrating out of the church. And so we're going, well, maybe I need to lighten it up a bit. And that wouldn't be my conviction. I would be more of, what does God's word really say? But I think that's been a growing trend. Yeah.
And how about the LGBTQ2 plus community? We want to show God's love in a very powerful, moving way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a very touchy subject, though, with, you know, they want to come into the church with a certain lifestyle. I mean, anybody has a certain lifestyle. So how do you approach that as a pastor in a loving, caring way?
That's at the heart of it, really, to let them know that you love them. And I have someone, a close member of my family, that's part of that community. And they've said to us, to my wife and I, you know, we know maybe you don't agree with us, but we've always known that you loved us. And to me, that's just by the Spirit of God working through us and caring for them and loving them. Yeah.
How about reaching some of the youth in our community? So many of the youth feel like they're lost,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they have this void in their heart that only God can fill.
Yeah.
But how do you lead them to the Lord, a lot of the youth?
Well, I think, like, first of all, I'm deeply impressed with the youth. Like, I see a hunger for the things of God that sometimes I don't see in my generation. So they're looking, from what I can see, for people that are really authentic, that are allowing them to not just hear the message, but actually engage it. Like, go out into the community and make a difference and give a cup of cold water in Jesus' name and really live the gospel in a very practical way. And I also think we're way behind the curve in the digital realm. And again, you know, I'll say something in church and I can see people Googling to see, is that really the case? And I think we have to have a growing comfort because this is the way it is now, right?
You know, it's interesting. Naheed Nenshi, the mayor of Calgary, when he first got elected, he said the big reason, what really helped him a lot, was reaching out to young people through social media.
Absolutely.
Especially on Twitter and tweeting.
Yeah.
Where the other candidates at that time said, oh, we don't need that. Yeah. You know?
Absolutely.
So maybe reaching young people where they're at, right?
Absolutely.
Through technology.
And I think, you know, streaming our services and making sure that the service is available for people to listen to, like I said earlier, anywhere, anytime, anyhow, is very important. I'm not afraid of that. I think that opens the door because then they're looking for community. And this is another thing I think that young people really, like we all do, we want someone to love us, to care for us, to be there for us. And this is where the local church at least should shine, right?
So how does it differ reaching the needs of the seniors in our community compared to the young people? How does it really differ? Maybe somebody's been a Christian for 50, 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, maybe they said, I've heard it all, I've done it all. You know, what can you possibly teach me?
Don't you think we're marginalizing the seniors in our community? I think they want an opportunity to serve. I think they're still very gifted by God, and we give them a challenge and invite them back in and say,
they want to be involved,
They
right?
want to be involved, and they're valued by God. We see many times in Scripture those that are even, 80 plus that are being used, like Caleb, go and take that next mountain. So give them a chance, invite them into the process.
Do you think sometimes there's a disrespect towards the seniors in our community, as opposed to Asian cultures that lift up a lot of seniors for their knowledge and their experience?
Absolutely. We sort of, raise up the value of being young and looking younger. And there's nothing wrong with those things, but there's great wisdom and value in people that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years of age.
Some seniors I've chatted with, and you know what, I tend to agree with them at times as well. They say when you go to church, you should put on your Sunday best. You're going to a house of worship. It's a very reverent, a holy place. But I see a lot of people today going with their flip-flops, their muscle shirts, shorts, wearing a ball cap. I thought you're supposed to take off your hat in church. But then I heard other people say, and I agree with them as well, saying, God just wants you to come as you are. Yeah. But can you understand both sides?
I think I hope I can anyways, but I would agree with your comment. In James it says God's really looking in the person's heart. And so that young person in shorts and flip-flops, their heart might be totally aligned with Christ. And the person in the three-piece suit, that may or may not be the case. But we invite people to just come as they are, as they're comfortable, and invite them into healthy relationship with Christ.
How about inviting people from other faiths, other religions? We have a lot of newcomers from Syria, other countries in the Middle East, from Muslim countries, or maybe some other countries in Asia, people who are Buddhists coming to our nation, Hindus, Sikhs. So how do we approach people from those other cultures and other religions to show them the love of Christ?
Yeah, because 1 in 5 Canadians are really new Canadians now, and they're just coming from every parts of the world. And in my own church, we have people from all over the world, and we welcome them. We have Muslim people coming to our church, and we just share Jesus' love, not just verbally, but we really have to live it out.
In what way?
Well, just hearing their story, how they came here, inviting them in, give them an opportunity to ask their questions, to have fun together. You want to be a church that certainly holds high the Word of God, but has fun together too, and hear their stories.
And you heard a recent stat as well saying that Alberta is what some of the...
Well, they call it the religious nuns.
Okay.
And actually Alberta has the highest percentage of religious nuns in all of Canada.
What is that, a religious nun?
People that are they've stepped away from anything to do with God or the church, or maybe they never had anything to do with Him, but they're just, they're maybe not even that hostile, they're just ambivalent, but they have no religious affiliation whatsoever.
So how can we reach those people, like you said, who've been burned perhaps in the past and are hurting on the inside?
Well, it's interesting because in the digital world, we know people are more connected than ever, and yet I think it would be safe to say they're lonelier than ever at the same time. So how do we, in an authentic way, invite them into community and care for them in a way that allows them to be who they are, and yet also at the same time to hear what God wants in their life and wants to offer them in their life?
Why is it that in a lot of congregations I see a lot more female attendees than I do male? Why do you think that is?
That's interesting. I wonder if we're not challenging the men as much as we should and saying, but I would really do this with both male and female. When are you prepared to give yourself to something that is greater than you? I think young people are looking for this too, something that has eternity stamped on it, and to leave a legacy that's not about you, but really about what God wants to do through you. And I think if we issued those kinds of challenges, you might see more men responding.
So Pastor Scott, I don't want you to reinvent the church, but if there's a couple of things that the church really needs to work on as a whole to draw more people into the house of worship, what do you think that is?
Well, one of the areas I think that we're not doing well in is just the whole area of single adults. About a third of adults are single now, and I think that we've done a decent job with family and marriages, which is important, but that's one area I think we need to focus on more. And again, going back to this idea of community and saying we're not going to be inward looking, we're going to really put our emphasis on being, because it's not about going to church per se, but being the church and going out into the community and loving people in Jesus' name, and then being part of a local church where you serve.
Being a light in a dark place, right?
Being a light in the dark place, salt, all those biblical images. Yeah.
Pastor Scott Dixon, lead pastor of University Drive Alliance Church, otherwise known as UDAC here in Lethbridge.
UDAC, yeah.
Thanks a lot for joining me on Bridge City
Thanks
News.
so much. Appreciate your time.
You bet. On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.